This is Bavaria, the capital, the ancient capital of Germany for many, many years. In this area of the world, there was a prestigious institution of learning controlled by the Jesuits called Ingolstadt University. Prestigious Jesuits were graduated from this university to go out and to deceive the world. Among the publications that we found there in the museum was a picture of a man by the name of Adam Weishaupt. He was a German Jew by blood, but he was also a Jesuit, and he was a dabbler in the occult arts. He was a genius, and at an early age he became a doctorate of canon law. He wrote and published in 1776 the Illuminati, the writings for a basis for a communist world. Proofs of this are given in a book called Proofs of Conspiracy by Robeson, 1798. It was sent out in hopes by this man who had been drawn into the organization in hopes of warning the world against the dangers of this worldwide revolution. He says in that book that Weishaupt had long been scheming the establishment of association or order which in time should govern the whole world. In his first fervor and high expectation, he hinted to several ex-Jesuits the probability of their recovering under a new name the influence which they formerly possessed. You remember, they had been dissolved in 1773. The influence which they formerly possessed, and of being again of great service to society by directing the education of youth of distinction now emancipated from all civil and religious prejudices. So Weishaupt approached Jesuits, and Jesuits, though they had been secularized, they laid the foundation for another great society, and I believe this is a branch of the Jesuit order. I still feel today that they have a strong connection in the Illuminati. They taught that Jesus of Nazareth was the grand master of their order, that he appeared at the time when the world was in utmost disorder and among a people who for ages had groaned under the yoke of bondage. He taught them the lessons of reason. To be more effective, he took in the aid of religion, of opinions which were current. And in a very clever manner, he combined his secret doctrines with the popular religion and with the customs which lay to his hand. He concealed the precious meaning and consequences of his doctrines, but fully disclosed them to the chosen few. In other words, Jesus is the master of the secret societies. And he taught that the world would be brought into a state of liberty and moral equality. They taught a natural goodness in every man. Once men are freed from the obstacles which subordinate rank and riches, and they add to that all churches and all governments must be taken out of the way. That these things continually thrown in our way, our secret association, they say, will work in a way that nothing can withstand, and man shall soon be free. And of course, since it was patterned after the Jesuit order, it was a system that would never be destroyed because it was even more secret than the secret workings of the Jesuit order. And Adam Weishaupt designed the symbol, Annuit Coeptus Novus Ordo Seclorum, our noble enterprise, a new world order. And you'll see that today the concept of the Illuminati is joked about, but you'll find fantasy games about the Illuminati, books on the Illuminati, as people have grown to accept the concept in the new age that we're in today. Adam Weishaupt adopted that symbol that now resides on your dollar bill from a picture of the pagan Catholic god that resided on the altarpieces in Ingolstadt in Bavaria. The significance of this design is as follows. The pyramid represents a conspiracy for the destruction of the universal church, Catholic Church, and establishment of a one-world or UN dictatorship. You see, this new order will even remove the Roman Church. It's an occult order now. The secret of the order, the eye radiating in all directions, is the all-spying eye that symbolizes the terroristic Gestapo-like espionage agency that Weishaupt set up under the name of the insinuating brethren to guard the secret of the order and to terrorize the populace into acceptance of its rule. This Ogpu had its first workout in the reign of terror of the French Revolution, which it was instrumental in organizing. So Weishaupt's Illuminati, Weishaupt's name was the father of Jacobinism. The Jacobins took over the French government. They were responsible for the reign of terror. That was their symbol. And now look what Ellen White has to say. She says in Great Controversy, page 273, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. The atheistical power that ruled in France during the Revolution, the reign of terror, did wage such a war against God and His holy word as the world has never witnessed. This is the Spirit of God telling us that the Illuminati is in fact the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit. It should be noted that this insignia acquired Masonic significance only after the merger of that order with the order of the Illuminati at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad in 1782. So the order of Illuminism, Luciferianism, nowadays called the Palladium, is a secret society within the high-ranking Masonic lodges. And 1782, you realize that it was a few years later, 1789, that the revolution broke out in France. But this was a symbol of the revolution in France. Looks familiar, doesn't it? You'll see this all over. We know that Voltaire, the atheist that he was educated in a Jesuit seminary. And this is the grave of Rousseau there in France today. All these men were hired by an elite group of Jewish bankers to carry out this great revolution. Robespierre. When the revolution broke out, they destroyed the flower of the nation. Priests came to the great National Assembly and gave up their priesthood in the Roman Church and accepted this new priesthood of the goddess of reason. The Bible, of course, was outlawed in that assembly. It was, and God was declared non-existent, the first time in the history of the world that anything like this had happened. But don't think for a minute that there wasn't a belief in the supernatural. No, whenever atheism comes, the belief in the supernatural rises. And in the court of Louis XVI, there were astrologers and astronomers. The great Cagliostro, a Mason and a devil worshiper, did his magic in the courts there. So you'll find the ascendancy of psychic and supernatural activity when they do away with religion. But even this man, a high-ranking Mason and a member of the Illuminati in the height of the revolution, was butchered when he tried to flee the country. They couldn't even control it once it let go. And that's the same way it's going to happen at the end of time. There'll be slaughter from one end of the earth to the other. When we went into the Communist Museum in East Berlin on the history of communism, the first display we walked into was on the French Revolution as the beginning of communism, 1789. So here is your beginning of communism. The word commune came from it was a French word for how the French lived, the houses around a court. Commune, communism. When Napoleon tried to set up a Holy Roman Empire, he refused to acknowledge the Pope as the head of it, rather placing the crown on his own head. In this way, through the work of the Napoleon, his troops, Berthier, that went down into Rome, the Pope lost his ecclesiastical power. And the prophecy of God, the 1260 days, were perfectly fulfilled at that time. You see, these things are essential to our understanding of prophecy, to understand the history of these things. Following Weishaupt, a man took over the inside of the secret societies to lead out in world revolution by the name of Mazzini. Mazzini was a genius, and very few of us can comprehend the type of minds these men had. Photostatic memories, who had great capacity. They were devil worshippers, so they had spirits working in them to give them amazing talents and ability. Now, research dug up letters from Mazzini, which revealed how the high priests of the Luciferian creed keep their identity and true purpose secret. In a letter Mazzini wrote to his revolutionary associate, Dr. Burdenstein, only a few years before he died, he said this: "We form an association of brothers in all points of the globe." Now, that's an admission, documented, that their secret society is universal. We wish to break every yoke. Their goal is to destroy all governments. Yet there is one unseen. There's a yoke, unseen, that we can hardly feel. Yet it weighs on us. Where is it coming from? Where is it? We don't know. Nobody knows. Or at least nobody tells, because this association is secret even to us, the veterans of the secret societies. What might that secret society be? You see? The secret society, I believe, that spawned it, the Jesuit order, is there. And this man wrote fluently and spoke fluently in 16 languages. He was the world-renowned scholar in occult and devil worship in his time. He became the great master of Masonry. He was called the Pope of Masonry in the United States. Mazzini brought him in, and they established both a satanic cult and also a Luciferian secret society for the 32nd and 33rd degree Masons. So this is documentation of that letter to the Palladium. This is what Albert Pike called it. That which we say to the crowd is we worship God, but it is the God that one worships without superstition. The religion should be by all us initiates of the high degrees maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai is God also, for the absolute can exist only as two gods. The concept of good and evil, like from Babylon. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy. They believe that the teaching of who Satan was created by the church is false. And the true and pure philosophical religion is a belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai, and that's the one they call the God of the Christians. But Lucifer, God of light, God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. And they teach that this God of evil, this God of the dark forces, which the entire world must now move into a state of mind, through transition of mind to repel, will be coming through the corridors of Orion very soon. And the world must be all occult to repel it. These are movements taking place today in the New Age movement. We shall unleash the nihilists, the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horrors will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization. The multitudes disillusioned with Christianity, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. Finally, out in public view, a manifestation which will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity, atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. He laid out a plan that this would take place in 3 world wars. The last world war would result in Palestine, and this was Pike's plan. Listen, this was Pike's plan before the turn of the century. Last war would be, the Third World War, they said, would be to raise up the power of the Arab nations and the power of Palestine, get the entire world on one side or the other, and then bring about incidents for an international destruction. That was their plan before the turn of the century. This is an example of one of these types of characters. This is Aleister Crowley, and here you see he was a 33rd 95-degree Mason. I don't know what that means, I'll tell you. He was one of the highest-ranking Rosicrucians in this time he took out the charter in San Jose. And we also know that he was a high-ranking initiate in what was called the Golden Dawn, or the Jewish Kabbalism that was set up for the elite in England. And this is the law that he established. And it goes something like this: the law of the strong, this is our law in the joy of the world. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And at the end of it, he says, man has a right to kill those who would thwart these rights. The slave shall serve. And these people believe this in these societies. There's no doubt about it. Because of the way they're working, it's very, very evident. In Nesta Webster's book, Secret Societies and Subversive Movements, she, as a Christian, drawing from Christian sources, viewed the Jews as responsible for this. Now, it's true that there were Jews involved in it, but by far it wasn't all Jews. In fact, those who had established the international banking system that financed most of this were not even blood Jews. They were called Khazar Jews. They were Northeastern Europeans that had converted to Judaism on the surface. But this is Amschan Meyer. He is the father of a family that became international bankers. He sent sons to the different nations of Europe. Those sons financed every part of the revolution and for those governments. And then when the economies of Europe began to collapse, the people had to turn to these people that they had borrowed their money from, and they turned over the control of their economy to these men. They still have a tremendous amount of control in the world today. Again, back to my little book, The Fiery Jesuits, from Pacific Union College. There it describes that the Jesuits were given authority over banking by the Roman Catholic Church. They took a vows to become the Jews among the Jews and enter into the world of banking and business. As finance is really the power in this world, and the Roman Church has the largest amount of gold of any organization, it's pretty clear that although we might see a facade of Zionism or a facade of Illuminism, behind it is the financial dynasty of 1500 years of grasping the wealth of the world by the Roman Catholic Church. Now, working closely with the Satanist Luciferian Mazzini was a man by the name of Karl Marx. Marx was not prominent in the secret society, but he and Engels were used to lay out the ideology of the communists to be used to start a revolution throughout the world. Following him, of course, Lenin picked it up. Lenin was a brilliant genius, no doubt about it. He studied in London, where most of these men were trained. And this is the plan that he laid out in 1917. The first thing was to secure the western borders through a takeover of the Baltic states and so on, and that was happened during the Second World War finally. But remember, 1917 was when it was planned. Gain control of the Far East through subversive attacks on Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on, and that's why we had trouble in Korea and Vietnam. It was Lenin's plan back in 1917. Gain control of Africa, the Mediterranean, the Indian Ocean, and all the waterways. And just before I came over here, there was a great big blow-up as it appears that Panama is turning to the communists. And we may lose that waterway now, too, as the Suez Canal and all these others. That was Lenin's plan. Gradually subject all of Latin America into communist rule, beginning with Cuba. Why Cuba? It was Lenin's plan. Once Russia has exercised control of the world, take over the United States when she is outgunned and completely surrounded. And we have a terrible thing developing now in the government of Mexico. Just before I left home, the government invited a Russian warship to come into their harbor in the Western Hemisphere. And this is a portent for a dangerous situation where Mexico will become a revolutionary force, and our borders, then you see, would become surrounded. The revulsion by the Buddhists of the terror of Catholic persecution of these poor people created the horrible situation in Vietnam. Those priests and nuns that were burning themselves to death there were not doing it against communism. They were doing it against a government that was controlled by the Roman papacy, backed by the United States, and suppressing all other religions in that community. When we look at what happened in Vietnam, we see clearly the involvement of Catholicism and the Jesuits working to confuse and destroy the world. This was Stalin's intermediate goal, which was to confuse, disorganize, and destroy the forces of capitalism around the world. Bring all nations together into a single world system of economy, force the advanced countries to pour prolonged financial aid into the underdeveloped countries, and then divide the world into regions, such as the regions we have right now, in preparation for coming into a dictatorship of the UN. And we can see things moving along very well. The United States is almost always voted against in the UN by the third world countries today. The growth of communism, its spread today, has been so phenomenal that those who refuse to acknowledge that it is a part of revelation and biblical prophecy are hiding their heads in the sand, and prophecy is passing them right by. On January 4, 1864, Ellen White was shown that before Lincoln's administration, the former administration had been planned and managed for the South to rob the North of their implements of war. They were contemplating a determined rebellion. The North did not understand the bitter, dreadful hatred of the South towards them and were unprepared for the deep-laid plots. So it was a conspiracy in the United States, years before the war broke out, by the papacy-controlled South to take the, I was going to say this country over, I'm sorry, I forgot where I was, to take over the United States. And in taking over the United States, they will inevitably take over the entire civilized world. They know that. In the book 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Chiniquy, he documents here his lawyer was Abraham Lincoln to defend him in a court case. Here's the bill that Lincoln wrote out, $50. Anyway, when Lincoln became president, he made these statements to Father Chiniquy, who became, it was during the time we were to give our message to the world, and he was traveling all over warning the world that Catholicism was Babylon. But this is what Lincoln said. Unfortunately, I feel more and more every day that it is not against the Americans of the South alone I am fighting. It is more against the Pope of Rome, his perfidious Jesuits, and the blind and bloodthirsty slaves. And this is quoted from Abraham Lincoln. I have a lot more on this, but I can only give a few excerpts from this talk. Is it not an absurdity, says Lincoln, to give to a man a thing which he has sworn to hate, curse, and destroy? And does not the Church of Rome hate, curse, and destroy liberty of conscience whenever she can do it safely? I cannot give liberty of conscience to the Pope and to his followers, the papists, so long as they tell me, through all their councils, theologians, and canon laws, that their conscience orders them to burn my wife, strangle my children, and cut my throat when they find their opportunity. You'll find out the war between the states was a religious war, but this was kept from the media. Abraham Lincoln said, the leading families of the South have received their education in great part, if not in whole, from the Jesuits and the nuns, hence those degrading principles of slavery, pride, and cruelty. And Ellen White says that slavery is going to return in the South. President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by the priests and the Jesuits of Rome. Booth was nothing but a tool of the Jesuits, says Chiniquy, after he went over the court cases, and it was all came out in the court case.